And our next speaker is my dear colleague, Karol Zdybel. Actually, he was among the first people who introduced me to the ideas of the Austrian School of Economics. Therefore, I am looking forward to this presentation, which will be about free banking and the capital structure of production. Let's welcome him with a round of applause.
Thank you very much for attending to this panel. Thank you very much for this presentation of mine. Of my person, and two opening remarks. First of all, I know we were supposed to sit here. I and Krzysztof realized this only after the second speech was over. So, well, it was too late. We thought to ourselves, well, crap basket, sorry. Not everything went as planned. And the second remark, more important to the speech I'm giving, is that even though the paper was entitled Free Banking and the Capital Structure of Production, the presentation is entitled Monetary Equilibrium and the Capital Structure of Production, which is actually a more accurate formulation of the topic. Because free banking is thought as a method of assuring and preserving the monetary equilibrium. However, it is not logically necessary, so to say, to have free banking in order to have monetary equilibrium. Those are conceptually separate things. Therefore, what I will be talking about is the relationship between monetary equilibrium, not only free banking, and the capital structure of production. And I will be arguing that there is no necessary contradiction between sustaining a monetary equilibrium and a well-balanced capital structure of production as depicted by the Austrian economics, the Austrian School of Economics. Contrary to what, for example, Professor Jesus Huerta de Sota claimed. While he's claiming that only 100% banking is capable of producing a situation when we don't have a cycle-inducing economic system. Now, the idea of monetary equilibrium is pretty simple. It means that there is out there a factor that's called demand for money, which is a desire to have money balances as part of one's financial portfolio. So, in Keynesian terms, we could label it hoarding, if you will. In other words, demand for money is not a transactional demand, but rather precautionary demand. Yeah, so we need to shield ourselves from uncertainty, for instance, right? And we accommodate money as part of our financial portfolios. That's the demand for money that we're referring to here. Well, and there is also a supply of money, of course. Those two factors produce some sort of level of prices. So the purchasing power of money is represented here in this picture as a vertical axis and the amount of money as the horizontal axis. Right, so those two factors produce some purchasing power of money, which is the price of money, basically. And moreover, the monetary equilibrium, narrowly understood, as it is understood by the monetary equilibrium theory, means that changes in demand for money should be, so to say, outweighed with changes in supply of money so that the price level remains constant. So, in principle, of course, we can imagine that any change in the demand for money or that the monetary equilibrium, broadly understood, can be restored by the adjustment of prices only. But the idea behind the monetary equilibrium, narrowly understood, that I'm talking about now, is that it is, well, some would argue better some other would argue no worse, to have a system which actually increases the supply of money in response to changes in demand for money. I mean, if the demand for money increases, the supply should as well, as we see here. And this narrower version of the monetary equilibrium theory is the monetary equilibrium theory I'm referring to from now on. Yeah? And the free banking system, of course, is said to be producing such a situation. I'm not here to defend that that's true, so I'm not here to argue for stability of free banking, which I believe is the case, but it's not the topic here. I'm only saying that this sort of nominal adjustments in response to changes in demand for money, especially to the increase in demand for money, so a situation in which people hoard more money than they previously were, and the capital structure of production, or the macroeconomic theory, so to say, developed by the Austrian school, are compatible. There is nothing inherently cycle-inducing in the monetary equilibrium theory, in the monetary equilibrium and such, not only theory, of course. So I'm not going to go deeply into the details of this. I think everyone is more or less familiar with the picture, which depicts the capital structure of production as a sequential process or sequential structure of producing complementary capital goods. The process stretched over time and regulated by the interest rate. The shape of this figure here depends, and the slope of the line, as in particular, depends on how much savings is provided to the market. And the concept of savings, by the way, is critical to understand that monetary equilibrium will indeed produce a new but still well-balanced structure of production, so a stable structure of production that will not collapse after factors receive their payments, as it is stated in the Austrian theory of a business cycle. Typically, it's said that, if we push the interest rate down artificially, then the capital structure underwent a restructuring that is not sustainable, in a sense that producers invest in more roundabout processes, so more capital-intensive processes, those that symbolically can be depicted here as those occupying the position away from the O point or 0 point, to my right. Yeah, those are more capital-intensive processes in a sense. So those are more sensitive to changes in the price of capital and the interest rate. But then, since the decrease in the interest rate was artificial, was not driven by supply of loanable funds or savings, voluntary savings, factors that are engaged in the production process receive their payments and attempt to restore the previous consumption spending pattern. Therefore, it is not sustainable. The new production structure is not sustainable because once we have the attempt to change the production structure, the new flow of money in the economy will be compatible with the previous, so the original, the true consumption savings pattern. Here in the picture, I'm trying to represent what does it mean for demand for factors to have a decreased demand for money. So with no reference to changing prices yet, I'm only saying that when we have some prices of the consumption goods and of intermediate or capital goods, so the goods from the point 0 or O to T, it means that at the very level of prices, people are willing to consume less and they hoard some fraction of money. So they are satisfied with a lower level of consumption. Instead of consuming, they decide to hoard money. Yeah? Now we are not thinking what happens next, whether prices adjust or not. We are only thinking about what it means for demand for factors. It means that it is decreased, so some factors like here become redundant. So we can satisfy the demand for consumption with less factors than previously. Therefore, the factors that are colored in blue here become somehow redundant at the current level of prices, of course. Free banking theorists and monetary equilibrium theorists in general would argue that this actually constitutes real saving. So it's not the case that we then inject new credit in the economy, which is not backed by voluntary savings. Rather, those savings are here, are depicted here. But what now? This is, of course, not the final state of affairs. We have some redundant factors, and what should be done with them? Well, here the monetary equilibrium theory enters the picture. So, if we are to sustain the level of consumption prices, like we see here, if we are to consume the same amount as after the demand for money decreased, and employ the factors that are now idle, we can inject new credit in the economy. So the justification of that is that when the demand for money decreases, it is technically more possible for banks to increase the supply of money without any additional risk in place. To make the long story short, here we see the red line, which is the restructured structure of production, or the new one. So obviously, because the stages that are away from the consumption, from consumption, become more profitable due to factors I mentioned before. So those stages are more interest rate sensitive, so to say. Those are, those production stages will have now additional incentives to expand, but it's not an expansion as depicted by the Austrian trade cycle theory. It's not a competition for already employed resources that inflate their prices disproportionately, in a sense that there are some prices that reveal that the investments that were undertaken were malinvestments. This expansion is possible because of the availability of those factors that we have here in blue. Therefore, it is a voluntary savings-based expansion. And since, well, the demand for money was an act of will, so to say, this new structure should be sustainable. So I think that's the whole story. I think I have no more time, right? Okay, thank you very much.
And we have time for some questions or remarks or commentaries on your part. We have one at a time.
Thank you very much. It's quite funny that I happened to write a similar paper on demand for money and hiking triangles. I wonder one thing. What if the source of hoarding goes not from the demand for consumption goods, but for future goods, So instead of saving more, I'm going to not save in the form of bonds, but in the form of cash.
And let's take another one before. Over here.
If I understood it correctly, you said that the demand for money leads to more saving, right? And then there is a basically change in the structure of production, and that also means change in the interest rate of the economy, right? But isn't that the case? There might be other sources why demand for money might change, which are not affiliated with change in the structure of saving versus consumption, like clearing systems, right? Clearing systems really reduce demand for money. Mises mentioned that. So there clearly might be changes in demand for money where the interest rate is not changing, or isn't that the case?
Okay, so beginning with the first question. This is actually a very important one, I would say. Because, of course, what I described here was only a special case, yeah? But I would say the most typical one, that people start to hoard because of some increase in uncertainty, for instance. So they consume less. But if the increase in the demand for money comes from the reduction of investment expenditures, it simply means that one form of savings is substituted for some other form of savings. So people acquire less capital goods with their money and hoard more, right? That's the process. However, because they hoard more, new credit becomes possible, right? So one factor is that because they spend less on investments, the yields go up. That's obvious, right? But because there's now more money to be injected in the system, that's possible, and this happens, the yield goes back down. Yeah, so those two factors like cancel out, I would say. You're not sure.
I have some stream of income, right? Part of that stream I save. Yeah. So I have something in my mattress, that's my hoarding, okay? Now I have some flow of income. Part of it I normally save and part of it I consume, okay? And now I decide to save. Instead of saving, right, from the flow of income in terms of bonds, stocks, etc., I will hoard more, right? And this money is not available on the stock exchange market. It's not available on the bond market, etc. It's hoarded more in my mattress. So this money is not available for the investment of firms.
No, I'm saying that when we have the monetary equilibrium system, it means that in response to hoarding, the money can be injected, not by the very same actor, not necessarily. Yeah? So like in the free banking case, when more people hoard, it means that banks run at lower risk of default when they have the fractional system. So they can increase the supply of money without bearing additional risk. Quite the opposite. I mean, the risk that they will not have sufficient funds to pay on demand is decreased. Therefore, they can compensate for this increased hoarding. So not the very agent that hoards supplies the funds, in a sense that he doesn't do it, or she doesn't do it directly, but indirectly through not putting the money in circulation, right? So that's the logic. And again, what was the second question? Sorry, just to remind in 2 words, please.
Might there be changes in demand for money which are not affiliated with the change of ratio of consumption and investment and saving? Because you kind of said that this is the case, but I think that, for example, the clearing system, if it's there, the demand for money goes down, but it's not affiliated with the change of how people save and consume at the same time. So interest rate doesn't change when the demand for money changes.
So, Karol, in just a few sentences.
Actually, I need to think, because I cannot respond to this immediately, since I'm not sure whether the increase in the demand for money that comes from the clearing system would be an increase in the demand for money as depicted here, so demand for hoarding, not spending, but increasing your cash balances as part of your financial portfolio, or some service that must be performed with the money that makes some resources employed in this very service, or conversely, not employed but released from some utilizations that now become redundant. Yes, because we have better functioning transaction system. Therefore, we have additional resources, right? So I need to think about, because I am not completely sure whether I understand your question properly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.